So today we're going to demonstrate the capabilities of the purchasing manual module for the VAT add-on. As you can see here, we have managed to automate all complex EU flows, solving them on the AP side with integration and automation for manual AP processes within the standard Miro transaction in SAP. What we aim to do with the Meridian add-on is remove the need for any manual selection of tax codes, and the process is now fully automated and fully compliant. We can also automate the determination of the correct VAT ID number on the buying entity purchase order. When we look at the overview of the AP module for Enhanced Miro, we've integrated seamlessly within that standard Miro transaction to have as little impact on your system as possible. We have added 2 additional tax relevant fields. Those are the 2-digit country code of the issuing VAT ID and also the 2-digit country code of the receiving VAT ID. We automatically propose those fields based on system-driven logic that is taken from the purchase order relevant to the posting of this invoices. And with that information, we automate the VAT code selection at a line item level. We can also produce exception reports to show any manual overrides that have been used in order to remove the Meridian functionality. When we think about the VAT training requirements for AP staff, there's quite a complex list of transactions that can be used in AP posting. And in all of these cases, it's very important to make sure we get accurate posting of the tax code, because even though there's 0% VAT in all of these complex flows, we need to make sure we're accurately reporting in the correct box of the VAT return for our VAT authorities to understand exactly what our business is doing. If we think about these complex flows like intra-community acquisition, extended reverse charge, etc., we know that the invoice will look very similar because there'll be 0% VAT on it. So what areas of the invoice can AP processors use to determine what the correct tax code should be? Within the Meridian VAT add-on, when activated, the Miro solution means that your AP processors only need to read the first 2 digits of the 2 VAT ID numbers that are on the invoice, that of the seller and that of the buyer. It means there's no training required on any complex VAT rules. So what can we see in practice when we think about the types of invoices that come into our business? You'll see here I've got 2 basic invoices, one on the left and one on the right. And in both cases, my vendor is the same German vendor, selling to my company code in Belgium. The sale of goods is the same on both, €1,000 with a VAT rate of 0%. When we look at these invoices straight up without too much knowledge of VAT, it's difficult to understand that these have completely different VAT treatment. So importantly, what we would need to do right now without a solution like Meridian's is potentially teach our AP resources how to understand the exemption text printed on the invoice here, such as the Article 138 on the left and Article 194 on the right. Even with a huge amount of VAT knowledge, it's quite difficult to tell these articles apart in all of the different jurisdictions in Europe, and with that information then select the right tax code. So instead of training AP staff how to recognize those rules, all we ask with the Meridian VAT add-on is that the first 2 digits of each VAT ID on the invoice is taken into account. And with that information, Meridian can take over and do a full automation of the tax code. If we look at a simple intra-EU acquisition for an AP vendor invoice, we can look here and see, like in the example previously, we've got our German vendor. They're sending us goods from Germany directly to Belgium, as we can see from the German plant of the vendor selling to the Belgian plant of us. These goods, however, on the invoice are not just standard rated goods, they're standard rated and reduced rate goods. So as we know, the required VAT treatment here is that for BE10 company code, the receiving AP vendor in this case, we need to use 2 different tax codes on this invoice. The first one being 21% intercommunity acquisition tax. In our system, that tax code is BM. And the other line needs to choose a different tax code, which is BS in our case, and that's 6% intercompany acquisition tax into Belgium. So looking at an invoice, how would it be possible, first of all, to understand what type of treatment this is, which is intercommunity acquisition, but even more importantly, that you've got 2 different types of goods that you're purchasing here, and those need different VAT codes. In this very simple invoice example, it's spelled out that we've got a sale of goods for €1,000 and a sale of reduced rated goods for €100. In all of my years working in VAT, there's never been an invoice as straightforward as this, and instead you would have a material number, perhaps a material description. And with just that information, it would be important to understand that in the jurisdiction where you're buying, which is Belgium, that these types of goods should both be at the full rate and the reduced rate. Very difficult by just looking at the invoice to understand that. So what will Meridian do in order to make that process simpler? I think the best way to go through this and to show you the effect of the Meridian add-on is to jump directly into an SAP system. And I'll do that now, showing you a test environment that I've prepared. As you can see, this is just a standard SAP system. I'm using an ECC box in this case, and we'll go directly into the standard Miro transaction. You'll notice here a couple of key differences between standard Miro screens and what we've got in Meridian, and those are here. We've got the country vendor VAT ID, the country receiving VAT ID, and also a new Meridian tax date. The use of this tax date is related to our tax code module for VAT, and a training for that can also be found on our website if somebody's interested. But basically what we're doing is we're copying in the invoice date directly from Miro to the Meridian tax date and using that field in order to determine what the correct VAT rate for a tax code should be, taking away the need for companies to create multiple tax codes when there's a VAT rate change in your company. But for today, let's look at the posting in Miro and how the tax code is determined. I'm just going to enter a small bit of information here to allow us to do the Miro posting. And this purchasing document that I'm entering reflects the invoice I've just shown in the slides. Once I hit enter, you'll see Meridian immediately take over and produce some pop-up messages that allow your AP processors to process this transaction correctly. So firstly, the system has automatically determined Germany as the country of the vendor VAT ID. We've done this by looking at the purchase order, checking the vendor master data, and of course seeing that the country for the vendor is Germany, so we accept this. Then we say the system has automatically determined Belgium to be the country of the receiving VAT ID. We look at the company code we're using to post the invoice, which is BE10, and then we've checked on the purchase order that the delivery address is not a country outside of Belgium, so the goods are being delivered directly to Belgium. With that information, we know that we want to use the Belgian VAT ID of the buyer. And with that information, Meridian has automatically determined the VAT code, and you're asked, would you like to accept that? So I'm going to hit yes. These pop-ups can be hidden as part of the daily process through one of our activation tables, and all of the code still works in the background with the same result of the VAT codes being automatically selected. Some of our clients wish to turn off these pop-ups to increase the speed that people can post invoices, and that's why we've allowed that functionality. So now you'll see straight away we've already determined two different tax codes. It's important to understand how this happened because generally when using Miro, somebody will have to make a determination of the tax code and select it manually. And as mentioned previously, understand exactly the materials that are being bought. Because Meridian can automatically read the purchase order and get the material information directly from there, we can see here that we have two different types of materials, one being Meridian Goods, which is a standard rated material, and Meridian Goods Low, which is a reduced rate material. And automatically, when we look at the two tax codes identified, we've got acquisition tax into the EU for goods with the SR, meaning standard rated. But then we've also identified €100 worth of the purchase is for reduced rate, and therefore we have the code BS acquisition tax EU goods reduced rate 2 in this case. So that's our 6% rate in Belgium. So with all of that automation, as we can see, there's very little work needed by the AP processors. All that's necessary is to come here and look at the country vendor VAT ID on the invoice. Is that Germany? Yes. Belgium? Yes, for the buyer. If that's all correct, you can go ahead and post this invoice. But why stop there? Why not look at cases where potentially the country of the vendor VAT ID might change? So I'll quickly jump back to the slides for that. So in this case, we know we've just checked this invoice and the German VAT ID is used. But as mentioned, it's possible that after a purchase order is created, maybe our vendor will decide for some reason that they need to send the goods from a different location. So maybe they've run out of the product in their German warehouse, and in this case, they need to send it from their Belgian warehouse. So even though the purchase order is the exact same, we can see from this flow that the goods are staying within Belgium. There's no movement of goods from Germany to Belgium, and therefore this creates a completely different VAT treatment. So in this case, when we look at the requirement, we need to choose two different tax codes. Those are BU and BV. We've got 21% extended reverse charge for purchases in Belgium from a non-established supplier selling to an established purchaser, which is us in Belgium. When those rules are met, we need to be able to determine the extended reverse charge tax code. But again, we have two different rates because it's the same purchase order. We've already seen we've got Meridian Goods and Meridian Goods Low. So we need to automatically determine two tax codes. So how can this be picked up in the system? As we spoke about, we've got the two additional Meridian fields. And in our first example, when the VAT registration number of our supplier was Germany, we saw the automatic proposal of these two tax codes. So as mentioned, the only training necessary for AP processors is to look at those two invoices, the two VAT registration numbers from the invoices. When they look at the second invoice example, they will see the Belgian VAT ID was used by our vendor. So in this case, all we've asked people to do is change that to Belgium, hit enter again. You can see another message to say Meridian has automatically changed the tax code and would you like to accept that? And we say yes. And automatically down here, we've determined that instead of using the intercommunity acquisition, we've got an extended reverse charge at the standard rate, and again, extended reverse charge at the reduced rate. How we've done that is quite simple. By looking at the vendor information with, of course, the purchase order as the indicator, we're able to look at the master data of that vendor and see how their VAT IDs are maintained. Within standard SAP, you create one VAT ID for a vendor, which shows their country of establishment. In our case, that would be Germany. But you can also add under the other tab further VAT registrations in Europe for your vendors. With Meridian, because we know that we can read the master data and see that there is a valid Belgian VAT ID for this vendor, we're able to change this tax code. If, for example, we had a delivery address coming into a country where we don't have a VAT registration ourselves, Meridian will produce an error message to let your processors know that this purchase cannot be made into a jurisdiction where you're not registered and somebody needs to make an approach to the tax manager. And all of those messages and error reports are handled throughout our VAT cockpit, giving full control to the VAT colleagues in your business to make decisions based on VAT.